If you work on contracts related to artificial intelligence, there's a concept that you should be familiar with. It's called model distillation. You should be familiar with it because model distillation creates a risk for the vendors of AI, leads them to put in terms that you might run into even if you're the customer. And if you are on the vendor side, we may have a actually serious legal problem related to model distillation because of a legal doctrine called copyright preemption. So let me explain. Model distillation is basically creating a new AI system by having your system, the student AI model, learn from an existing one, probably a larger, more complex one, which you call the teacher. So the student is essentially studying the teacher. Weird to talk about software doing that. In order to create a new version of the AI, a new AI that was created much cheaper and maybe faster and cheaper to manage and run. Technically speaking, this can't happen as model distillation was classically used. This can't happen without direct access to the teacher model. So if you're the AI vendor of the teacher, you don't have to worry about somebody doing model distillation unless you give them direct access to your model, to all the stuff that's necessary for it. But it's a worry because of this, because of something called black box distillation. Black box distillation refers to somebody trying to teach their student model by looking at your teacher model's outputs only or primarily. And so that doesn't require your permission. Your competitor could build a competing product by signing up for your broad AI system, studying the outputs, and creating a new version that was created much cheaper, taking advantage of your work. That's black box distillation. It's also sometimes called behavioral cloning. That is what allegedly DeepSeek did to ChatGPT. So why is this a problem? Well, we're going to add terms that say you can't do this. No problem. We want a term in the contract that says if you sign up for our AI, you can't use it to compete with us, basically. That's where we run into the problem. And the problem has to do with copyright preemption, a legal doctrine in federal copyright law. What the doctrine basically says is only federal law can govern the subject matter of copyright. So states can't create their own version of copyright. There can't be a state copyright law that essentially achieves the same thing. Also, the implied meaning, though, that the courts have found is that copyright preemption also means you can't create your own private version of copyright with a contract. And in short, the idea is if you have an asset that is not protected by copyright, you can't use a contract to sort of create your own private version of copyright and protect it from reproduction and competitive use in that way. No problem for most software deals. We do have assets protected by copyright, but in AI deals, when you're looking at that black box model distillation, the outputs probably aren't protected by copyright. As you may know, if you've taken some of our trainings or read this online, you don't have a copyright in the output generated by an AI. Outputs are not protectable by copyright. And so we have this copyright preemption issue wherever we're trying to use copyright like contract terms to restrict what you can do with outputs. So let's look at some of the language that AI vendors typically use to prevent things like model distillation. So here on the screen, you've got language from Gemini's from Gemini's AI. You may not, except as permitted through the API, use any automated or programmatic method to extract data or output from the services. They're going after model distillation and stuff like that. But because the outputs are not protected by copyright, that looks like imposing a copyright-like regime where one can't exist, and so you have copyright preemption. Or let's look at this language from ChatGPT. You may not use output from the service to develop models that compete with OpenAI. That's on the nose. It's exactly about outputs. It's exactly about trying to prevent black box model distillation. And again, the outputs aren't protectable, so this raises a copyright preemption issue. By the way, most of the time I recommend that tech vendors have language that say even more broadly, you won't access our system at all for any competitive purpose. And where the system is basically software that's protectable by copyright, no problem. But here where we're talking about AI outputs that are not, we have copyright preemption as a possible issue. So just a quick note, so you know, that doesn't mean all restrictions you're going to put on use of your AI are destroyed by copyright prevention. So privacy terms, you won't use the AI to access somebody's private data, to impersonate somebody. You won't use it to violate the law. You won't use it to commit election fraud, etc. Those are not going after the competitive goals of copyright. So there's no reason to think that those would be unenforceable, even if the asset you're trying to protect is copyright, is a non-copyrightable asset like the outputs from your AI. So in short, we don't really have a good solution for this problem. There isn't language out there that we can say with absolute confidence is going to survive. And in fact, what we really need to solve this model distillation copyright preemption problem is more guidance from the courts. There just needs to be more court decisions that will tell us when and to what extent copyright preemption is going to keep our anti-model distillation terms from working. For now, I think if you're on the vendor side, you should keep those terms there, but keep an eye on this issue. Read up on it if you're in charge of coming up with terms for your client or yourself. And just be aware that those terms may have an enforcement problem. And if you're on the customer side, I think it's fair to say this isn't really your issue. That's at least if you're not buying access to your vendor's system to do model distillation and to create a competing product. I think otherwise this isn't primarily your issue, but you need to be aware of what your vendor is struggling with and why you may see some sort of twisting and turning terms and conditions on this issue. I hope you found that helpful, and I hope you'll check out some of our trainings on this and other issues. We cover AI, cloud, all kinds of different contracts. So please visit us at techcontracts.com. Thanks.